ICT world. And I wanted to go to you, Nal, and sort of talk about, do you see this as an opportunity for India, and how do we really take advantage of the fact that we've got such a strong ICT capability in India and dovetail this with the manufacturing theme?
Yeah, thanks, Sharat. I think as you think about manufacturing and increasing manufacturing in the country, you're probably adding a 10x increase in capacity of manufacturing in the country, right? So which means that 90% of capacity is going to be greenfield. Now the question is, if you're going to put so much of capacity, how are you going to be competitive with respect to other countries which are doing the same thing, like a Thailand or Indonesia or some of the developed countries, right? And that's really where using technology to leapfrog in terms of asset productivity, in terms of employee productivity comes in, right? And one of the things we have seen, and we've done it globally and thankfully with Adani in India as well, as how do you use concepts like Internet of Everything, Internet of Things, and use that to leverage and drive productivity, to drive innovation to a much higher level than what we have seen, right? Just to give you an example, one area where we work very closely is in the oil and gas sector, refining to be specific, right? How do you use technology, Internet of Everything, to connect all the machinery which is there in the refinery process and able to collect the data out of that and get insights out of it which can be used for improving productivity, for safety for that matter, and to some extent to compliance as well, right? So just to give you an example, with one of the refineries, what we did was we basically put asset tags across all the high value equipment. We also put tags, smart tags for all the employees. So at any point in time, there's an officer sitting who can quickly pinpoint where each and every employee is, where each and every machinery sits, where the spare parts are sitting. And what you can do with that is a whole lot of things, right? What it does is it can tell you if there is a gas emission happening at some point in time, some kind of harmful gas. You can quickly figure out where exactly that is happening, how many people are close to that gas emission which is happening. More importantly, you can also figure out who is the person who's trained to actually go and contain the situation and where is he in the refinery at that point in time. A refinery generally, the kind of scale you talk at Adani is several football fields large, right? So that gives you the time and efficiency to actually go address the situation. Second thing is, if you're talking of a refinery, there's several zones in a refinery, a zone 1, zone 2, zone 3. And there are people who are trained to operate in certain zones. You're not supposed to enter the other zone at any point in time, right? And that creates a lot of issues around compliance, safety. So at any point in time, if there's a person who's wearing that asset tag and he's trained only to operate in zone 1, if he ends up in zone 0 or zone 2, you can actually, there's a flag which will automatically come up and say that this person is not supposed to be in the zone. And that information is useful for safety, it's useful for compliance, right? It could be useful for discipline. There's a lot of other issues because you have so much contract labor which sits within your refineries as well, right? Similarly, if you have a machinery which has gone down and it needs a spare part, figuring out where that spare part is sitting in such a large refinery and quickly able to say that, okay, I need to pick it up, I need to go there, and you can improve your productivity, and you can reduce the downtime by almost 50% when you go do that, right? And these are some of the things we have done in several refineries outside, like Shell, Marathon, and some of the things we're doing with Adani as well, is like, how do you use this? And this is a little bit of combining the digitization piece, which the government is talking about, along with the Make in India, and really create a level of performance which is not something seen elsewhere in the country, and that makes it a lot more competitive for us to drive that.
Thank you, Nal. I mean, one of the themes which we talked about was also around sort of skill development. It came up in a conversation also around sort of how do you work with the SMEs, because at the end there is an extended supply chain. And some of the numbers are quite staggering. We have about 12 to 15 million people coming every year into the employment sector. So Atul, I just wanted to go over to you to sort of deepen our discussion on this topic. How do we think about skill development, which is going to be the backbone? And just some of your thoughts about how does this link up with the MSME sector, where most of the job employment is going to take place?
Thank you. Look, in skill development, what we're trying to achieve through the various programs we have of NSTC is providing short-term courses aligned to a job role. So it's very much like saying the industry forces and the market forces are going to govern what kind of skill development is going to happen. Because at the end of it, the outcome has to be a job, some kind of wage employment or self-employment. Now, if you look at manufacturing itself, and Make in India is a very, very nice slogan to really take it forward in India. But the problem is that we are seeing is manufacturing is not aspirational in India, especially as of the moment. and we have to make it aspirational. So I think that's another big thing that we have to work on simultaneously. And when I say aspirational, we did I mean, NSTC just completed a reward scheme by which skill development happened all across India. Voluntarily, youth could come and enroll themselves and any kind of courses that are running. And 90% of the enrollment happened in services sector. Whereas the reward for having successfully completed a course and getting a certificate for it was higher-end manufacturing. So despite higher rewards, more training happened in services. So that's kind of giving a flavor of what the Indian youth is currently looking at. So I think we need to now break this Make in India and the sectors Mr. Dadu just spoke about, and the places where, and even the companies we are talking of. Let's try and break up what they really need in terms of what kind of job roles you need and how many. You may not get it to the last thousands or something, but at least a flavor. And then give a career path to our youth. This is where you start and this is how you grow up. And what are the various breakpoints of how you can improve your lives. And it's not just about being educated and being a graduate to come into this particular field. You can be whatever, but what matters is the skill. And for that, what NSTC is trying to propagate is, when I talk of short-term courses and a job role, just to give an example, I mean, if you want to become a welder, you can go to an ITI or Polytechnic and do an 18-month of courses. You taught through the TIG welding, gas welding, arc welding, metal alloys, flame torch, everything. The whole gamut is taught to you, and you come out with a piece of paper saying that you're a welder. But what the industry requires, let's say what the auto industry requires, is the person being part of a production line, and the chassis comes in front of him or her, applies 9 welds in 2 minutes, timeliness, quality, and precision. That's it. And to do that, the decision of what torch to use and what flame and what alloy, all that's been taken. In order to learn that bit, you just need 45 days maybe. And it's a skill to be able to do that. If you don't do that properly, the company's productivity directly gets impacted. So such kind of job roles and seeing on the production shop floor is what we require, so that we can align the skill development in line with what the country needs and what the foreign FDI is going to come in. So we should not be faced with the problem that you've got the money ready, you've got the will ready, you've got the people ready to invest, but the people to do the job are not there. So I think that's what the next level of things we need to see. And aspiration also, I mean, I was just having my 25th year reunion just about a month back, and we were analyzing the pattern coming out from a pretty good MBA school on of the people who were taking jobs. So there are engineers who are the intake, they had worked in engineering firms, and after doing an MBA, they wouldn't like to go back to production management. They would rather join a consultancy to advise manufacturing, but not get their hands dirty by getting into manufacturing. I think that's the aspirational part we have to work on together.
Mr. Dadu, if I were to go back to you, just to connect the dots here, as we've talked about sort of the Make in India program and the manufacturing agenda, what are some of the thoughts that the government is thinking about sort of connecting the skill development part that Abdul just talked about with the vision that's there to increase manufacturing depth?
Let me make 2 comments here. Number 1, the CSR initiative that entails 2% of all the net profits to be used for a productive social activity. I think the time has come when at least the big manufacturing industries must devote that 2% to skill development. We talk about skill shortages, acute skill shortages in big companies. And the companies are now looking at the government to provide that skill development effort. Please understand, it is not possible for the government to provide skill development institutes in every sector of the economy. It's impossible. Many of the state-run national institutes are world-class, but the point is that ITIs cannot do the job that you require. And creating special institutes will take a lot of time. So if the 2% CSR effort goes into skill development at the shop floor itself, that would meet the ends of justice. Now, let me tell you, the leather sector and the export of leather that in the Ministry of Commerce I deal with. And we have a specialized institute called the Footwear Design and Development Institute, FDDI. It started in 1995. Till 2005, we had just one institute at Noida. In the last 8 years, we have created 7 more institutes, and this year we'll have 4 more. So we'll have 12 FDDIs looking after the leather sector. Leather sector's growth, if you see, it was $1 billion of export 10 years ago. Last year it was $5 billion. This year it will be $6 billion. We are growing at about 20%, and our domestic demand itself is about $6 billion. Exports is $6 billion today. In the National Workshop on Make in India, we had projected a total production of $27 billion. $12 billion to meet the domestic demand and $15 billion to meet the export demand. Now, where am I going to get people who can cut the leather, stitch the leather, make it into a shoe, if we don't have a large-scale program of skilling people? Now, the Footwear Design and Development Institute trained 2 lakh people last year through 55 skill development centers. They're going to create another 70-odd centers and make it a total of 125 skill development centers, so that the entire demand for skilling in the leather sector can be produced. Now, we are doing this internally because leather sector, the driver has been the government always, and the private sector is the one who makes the shoes but wants government to skill them. But it's not possible to do this in every sector. Let me take another example, gems and jewelry. Gems and jewelry sector requires very acute precision skills. Bengal is the home of all these skills. Now, we gave money to the Bengal government to create a skill institute, and one of the private sector players gave the land. But unfortunately, that has not come through. The point I'm trying to make is, when you create an export base of $60 billion for gems and jewelry, the gems and jewelry merchants will have to think about creating a right type of institute to provide the skilled labor that you require in future. If you don't do that and expect the government to do it, I don't think you're being fair to the government. With this, I would also like to mention that Skill Development Corporation, which has been set up, and Mr. Bhatnagar is here, and the Skill Development Agency, government is trying to ensure that a vision and a roadmap is created. But each major industry, as I mentioned, will have to contribute to this to make this a reality. Thank you.
Pratyush, I want to go back to sort of one of the examples that you talked about, which was, sort of developing an extended supply chain. I think if manufacturing has to become real in India, it can't be just limited to large corporates. There is a large MSME sector which equally has to develop slowly in scale and sort of share in that growth. And you sort of took a defense offset example to talk about the example of actually developing one of the suppliers. Can you talk a little more about that experience, and also how is that supply chain now sort of getting more connected with the global Boeing network as well, just from a future exports opportunity as well?
Right. So it's really about creating the whole ecosystem. You can't just pick and choose, especially in a highly complex manufacturing and advanced manufacturing such as in aerospace. So when we think about, let's say, manufacturing, let's say, a piece of aerostructures, we need to make sure the frontline factory workers are trained. We need to make sure the material sources are available, right? We develop them over time. We have to make sure that the downstream supply chain has to be ready. We have to ensure that the engineering support that comes for that is prepared. So we have to train the engineers to be overseeing and providing inputs into manufacturing process. We have to make sure that the quality assurance, actually quality control, not just assurance in aerospace, is prepared. We have to ensure that the tooling is available, so tool manufacturing is ready. So you have to really think about all that to prepare the Indian industry to participate in the global supply chain. Now, the second point of question that you brought out is critical. We have to get the industry here competitive enough so they become embedded in the global supply chain for the long term, right? We have to teach them how to fish, not to give them a fish of defense offsets and get it done. because that is a very short-term game. Long-term game of getting them ready, being competitive is a game changer. That's what will really embed India in global supply chain and take the skills forward. I want to come back to one more thing what Mr. Daddu was saying about how to find funds for investing in skill development. One of the options is defense offsets. It's already written in there. We can do training. If that's clarified, that multiplies significantly, right? That will allow us to scale up much more than just the CSR dollars. We're prepared to do that, right? Enable us, and we will take it up 100-folds. And with that, I have to apologize. I have to duck out, so I'll do that.
Mr. Valluri, maybe you would like to just expand on this topic around sort of the SMEs and sort of developing a more global supply chain, just given your wide experience with the industrial infrastructure in India.
Yeah, let me just kind of put forth some thoughts of how one could look at the future, which is really executable. And I'm sure that a lot of us have discussions with the government, and a lot of you have discussions with the government. And one of the thoughts which really comes to me, whether it's defense, whether it's any other area, and to your question of how do we build this ecosystem, I think there are three pieces to this, at least from the industry standpoint. I look at it. One is we have not leveraged our university system very well. The whole university ecosystem has not been leveraged. There's a lot of talent there. We don't do that very effectively. The first thing we do is, okay, there's a product manufactured in the US or Japan or Germany. Let's bring it here, strip it out, fix it up, and then start selling it. I think we haven't done that very effectively. That's number one. Number two is really, this whole manufacturing ecospace. How do we actually build a manufacturing ecospace? I mean, today if I look at Ingersoll Rand, we have suppliers or our vendors. We have factories in Gujarat, we have factories in Tamil Nadu, we have factories in Delhi, and our suppliers and vendors would be sitting all over the country. We understand logistics is a big problem, so there is a lot of inefficiency that comes in, right? The amount of training you need to provide to vendors, and that whole ecosystem kind of needs to be revamped. But I think in the future, if we can really look at a three-pronged approach, given the markets that are being defined today, and I think everybody has got a pie in it, everybody can play the game there very effectively. Now let's assume that we want to build a water hub in the country. A water hub, when I say a region, an area where we really talk about water technologies, water manufacturing. Water is a key problem in the country. Can they be system integrators? Can they be vendors? Can there be an ecosystem that's built in that hub where you actually build the entire water ecosystem over there? Attached to that, there's a university ecosystem where there are a bunch of universities, or a group of universities, a group of institutes actually working on developing technologies which are relevant for water. What you're beginning to do then is you're not only looking at system application integration, you're looking at vendor-based development, you're also looking at a university ecosystem which is beginning to innovate and design and develop products, and that's attached to that hub. You can think of many hubs. You can think of a defense hub, you can think of a sanitation hub, you can think of an energy hub. But once you create these hubs across the country, and they could be multiple water hubs, multiple sanitation hubs, or multiple other market hubs, which really start building economies of scale, technology, innovation together. And I think to your point, how do we actually look at this depth of this creation? That's when you start creating really a depth of technology, depth of innovation, when this ecosystem starts working. Whether it's skilling, whether it's developing products, technologies, I think you start bringing that. And I do believe strongly that when I look at the capital goods industry in which we operate in a very large way, we find these inefficiencies at a number of places. As I mentioned to you, we got to go teach somebody Lean, we got to go teach somebody Six Sigma, we got to go teach the person, how are you going to actually create components, products, etc., whereas the factories will be somewhere else and the vendors will be somewhere else. So I do believe that creating these hubs is not a big deal. I mean, the way we are doing DMIC, can states actually take that up? If the government actually enables that, and I think it is beginning to kind of create that kind of an ecosystem, I think this becomes a very, very powerful, strong way of driving in the future.
I mean, we talked about an ecosystem, we've talked about sort of elements of the supply chain, skill development, innovation around that. Amit, I wanted to go back to you, and you referred to this in your conversation, isn't on the subject of financing. I think capital is one of the elements because this is an asset-heavy business. And so where do you see the role of financing, especially given the state on, there is a set of NPAs already on the ground over the last few years, but there's a lot of foreign capital which is also interested. So how do you really balance these two elements and sort of talk about the subject of financing in manufacturing?
See, I think the issue really is not really the amount or the extent of financing. I think there is good capital available out there if you've got the right concept in mind. Now, in my opinion, if you see manufacturing in India, there are plenty of examples across sectors they've done really well. But if you see, by far and large, manufacturing setups were made not looking at the long term. So if some state gave you, let's say, some benefit and which trimmed 10-12% on your EBITDA, you said, let me go set up my manufacturing unit there. You're looking at a manufacturing facility for 30 years at least, I would think, right? Now, when you're looking at a long-term vision, instead of trying to adjust your manufacturing to the incentives or the skills that are available in a particular sector, I think the approach should be very different. I've also had experience of working in a setup which was heavily industrial, so to speak. But we should create our supply chain and make an ideal system for manufacturing and then let the other considerations come in and not the other way around. So I also see Welspun here on the panel, I think, next. And it's a great example. If you look, Welspun set up their facilities for towel manufacturing in Bhuj when there was nothing there. There was not a single building that was standing on the ground. Today, they are the largest manufacturers of towels, and probably 1 in every 4 towels is probably made by Welspun. They didn't have an ecosystem there, nothing was left. But it is how you design your supply chain and you create your cluster around it. I think I couldn't agree with you more. You do not have to go just because there is a skilling institute there and just because there is a railway station next to it, but everything else is unfavorable, that you go set up your manufacturing there. It's absolutely, in my opinion, something that shouldn't be done because it is not a sustainable solution. And I think the future for us is the clustered approach. And once manufacturing happens in a systematic manner, because if you've designed your manufacturing and your supply chain, which is very critical, in order for your business to be there for the long term, other ancillaries will come. So Boeing, when they went to Nagpur, as Pratyush was saying, there was not a single aviation-related activity in Nagpur, but strategically it happened to be the center of the country. That's where the 0 point is, and it made sense for them to be there. And you've got the ecosystem which starts developing around it automatically. The same thing happened in Gujarat. We didn't have a single auto company in Gujarat. Today it's becoming the next hotspot. So why did people go to Gujarat when there was no ecosystem for auto industry there? It's because all the other places were getting choked. So they said, well, if we are looking at the next 30 years, we need to have a place which will ensure debottlenecking of my supply chain. And as world gets more and more unstable today, for one thing or the other, and everything being linked today. So I'm taking today, all of us have heard about the hedge fund which went down under last week when the Swiss Re was depegged against the euro. Who would have thought that, one day to the next, a company which is there for 34 years, giving $1 billion in market cap just becomes zero overnight. So these fluctuations will be there. But if we make our manufacturing on idealistic scenarios and have the enabling factors dovetail with it, I think we have a far more sustainable and a concrete solution for manufacturing.
Thanks a lot. Atul, coming back to you, I just want to take a point that Mr. Valluri talked about as one of the components being the education system, our universities, our research facilities, and we've got plenty of those across the country. And again, as one of the members of the ecosystem to really make this entire manufacturing agenda work, how are you seeing that evolve in terms of closer partnership with industry, closer partnership with NSDC from a skilling perspective, just being a much more active member of the ecosystem surrounding manufacturing?
Yeah, it's very true that the graduates that were being churned out from our education institutes, 75% of them were found unemployable because they did not have specific skills. And that's why the whole paradigm shift into saying that what does industry require, and that's what NSDC has got now 31 sector skill councils for each sector. And these are industry experts who get together and say, okay, what is it required in our sector? What kind of standards and what kind of competencies and what kind of job roles, and they do the assessment. So you just turn the whole paradigm shift that we have created is they decide what kind of people are required, they do the assessment, and if the competencies are there, then why should a person not be employable? Now it's a matter of aligning that with what Make in India requires. Which sector is going to grow at what rate, where, in which part of the country, as you rightly said, well, if it's Nagpur for aviation, then yeah, then that's a place to have training across that particular place. So that is that bit of, let's say, getting the jigsaw puzzle right is what our next challenge is, and that's what we are seeking from the industry to tell us. And as far as the value chain is concerned, involving the SMEs, because there are more than 45 million SMEs in this country, I think it's important that the SMEs now start looking at certified skilled manpower. It's not that India doesn't have skilled manpower, it has, but nobody knows what is are they certified against what level? Because our focus has been typically on education. We are typically a degree-minded mindset that's there, whether it comes to getting jobs or getting married. It's either way, it's all about graduation. So we want to break that up into saying learn a skill, learn more, earn more, and by the way, you do your graduation inside, take 10 years if you want to. But you are on your feet, you are serving the industry, and somewhere you're serving the nation, and skilling requires that respect that education typically has had in the past, because our tagline is literally hunar hai to qadar hai. And if India has to become the skill capital of the world, I think that's what it has to progress on.
Thanks, Atul. Nal, I want to just come back to you, and again on pretty much the same topic, but more from a technology perspective, because technology firms have always been very well connected with setting up their own training centers and backward integrating into skill development. How do you see that evolving, from your perspective in this agenda?
Yeah, so I think we haven't talked about the electronics industry, so I'm going to give a couple of factoids if I can before I go further, right? If you look at the FDI spend which is happening, or the imports that we do into the country, after oil and gold, the third largest is electronics imports which come into the country. Today it's about $30 billion. By 2020, it's probably going to be like $300 billion, at which point it will be larger than gold and oil, right? So it won't be oil which will be causing a problem for us, it will be electronics, right? And the fundamental challenge to that is we don't have a very credible electronics manufacturing system in the country at this point in time, right? And it's a huge challenge, and the biggest issue with that is the ecosystem doesn't exist, firstly, of the entire value chain. Components don't get manufactured here, there's no semiconductors manufacturing, and therefore none of the other guys come in. The fundamental problem is we don't have an R&D ecosystem, we don't have a skills base here to actually go build something like that. A lot of people talk about infrastructure, a lot of people talk about logistics and freight. Those are issues, but those are not the most critical issues or the issues which are mission critical. It's actually the fact that there is no ecosystem, there is no way you build that, right? So I think in some form or shape, this is where the industry has to come in to actually help develop some of those skill base. The government has to also step in some form or shape, because we need some kind of R&D incubators which need to be put in so that some amount of innovation happens in the space around manufacturing, around designing new products, new things in electronics. Otherwise, we're going to have a challenge where you will have a $300 billion deficit or balance of trade imbalance because of primarily coming out of electronics imports coming into the country, right? And I think in some ways, the government and the ministries are working together to figure out what are the policies they have to put in place to go ahead and do that, more around incentives for innovation, also in terms of figuring out what's the right tax structure you have to put in place. The challenge in the electronic industry is a little bit unique, which is in any other industry, freight cost becomes very important, right? You have things coming in, they're fairly large, bulky pieces. In electronics, I mean, if you take an iPhone as an example, 5 iPhones put together is essentially how much a car would cost you, roughly speaking, right? So you're talking of a high value item which can be manufactured pretty much anywhere in the world and shipped to your country just like this, right? So if you're not competitive on the dimension which is not taking into logistics, freight, or any of those things into consideration, you're looking at a very highly efficient industry that you have to build, and the only way to do it is having the innovation put in place, having the R&D put in place, which the universities have to step in. Of course, the industries have to step in as well. But really building the database, that skill base that you have to put in place. And the last piece around this is these are high capex industries. The government has to work with some of the large players like Intel, AMD, and some of these chip manufacturers and pull them in. And that generally is almost like, you know, winning the bid for an Olympic Games, right? It's basically you versus Germany versus US versus China. And that's a high stakes game. We need to learn how to play that game. Otherwise, that component industry will never come in. If that component industry doesn't come in, it's not easy for you to get the rest of the OEM industry to get into play.
Thanks a lot. Just to sort of close the session, I'd like to come